My daughter-in-law accidentally sent me my son's lunchbox. A colleague saw it, turned pale, and whispered, "Take your son to the hospital now." Why, I asked, my heart pounding against my ribs. I cannot explain. He said, his hands trembling as he sealed the container, "But do it, or he might die within the hour." What I found inside that innocent-looking thermal bag was not food. It was a death sentence wrapped in a love note. Before I take you into the nightmare that destroyed my family and almost killed my only son, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. If you have ever felt in your gut that someone close to you was wearing a mask, or if you have ever had to fight to save a family member who did not want to be saved, leave a like and tell me your story in the comments. I am Thomas Bennett, 70 years old, and for 40 years I worked as a forensic examiner in Seattle. I spent my life cutting open bodies to find out how they died. I never imagined I would have to use those same skills to keep my own son from ending up on a steel table. It started on a Tuesday, a day that felt deceptively normal. Seattle was under a blanket of gray drizzle, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes old joints ache. I was sitting in my kitchen with Gary, my oldest friend, and a man who knows more about poisons than anyone else on the West Coast. Gary is a retired toxicologist. We were enjoying black coffee and arguing about the majestic decline of the Mariners when the doorbell rang. A courier stood there holding a sleek, expensive-looking thermal lunch bag. It was heavy, branding a logo of some high-end organic lifestyle company my daughter-in-law Monica was obsessed with. I signed for it, frowning. The label was smudged, but I saw the address. 1208 Pine Street, my house. But the name on the tag was Daniel Bennett, my son. He lives down the block at 1280 Pine Street, a simple transposition of numbers by a rushed delivery driver. I brought the bag into the kitchen. Attached to the handle was a note written in Monica's looping, bubbly handwriting, decorated with little heart stickers. It read, "To my darling husband. Here is your special energy boost. Remember to drink the green jar first. It will help with the detox. Love, Monica." I felt a surge of irritation. Detox. That was Monica's answer to everything. My son Daniel is 38 years old. He is the CEO of a biotech startup, a brilliant mind, a man who used to play varsity football. But for the last 6 months, he has been withering away. He lost 30 pounds. His hair started thinning. He complained of constant fatigue and numbness in his fingers. The doctors were baffled, running test after test, while Monica insisted it was just stress and gluten allergies. She took over his diet completely. No more steaks, no more burgers, just raw vegetables, and these mysterious juices she prepared herself in her locked sanctuary of a kitchen. Curiosity got the better of me. Maybe it was the father in me wanting to see what my starving son was being fed, or maybe it was the old detective's instinct that never truly sleeps. I unzipped the bag. Inside, nestled between ice packs, was a glass container of sad-looking raw kale salad, without dressing, and a heavy mason jar filled with a thick, murky green liquid. "Well," Gary chuckled, taking a sip of his coffee, "looks like Daniel is in for another delicious meal of grass and sadness." I lifted the jar. It was cold. The liquid was separated with a layer of sediment at the bottom. I unscrewed the lid, intending to just give it a sniff. I expected the smell of celery or cucumber, or maybe ginger. The moment the seal broke, a faint, sharp scent wafted up. It was sweet, cloying, and metallic. Gary stopped laughing. In 40 years of friendship, I have seen Gary drunk, I have seen him angry, and I have seen him mourn. But I had never seen him freeze like that. He dropped his coffee mug. It shattered on the floor, ceramic shards and hot liquid exploding everywhere, but Gary did not even flinch. His eyes were locked on the jar in my hand. "Put the lid back on," Gary said. His voice was not loud, but it had an intensity that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. What I asked, confused. "It is just kale juice, Gary. Monica is crazy about this health stuff." Thomas put the lid back on right now and set it on the table. "Do not breathe it in." I did as he said, my hands starting to shake because of the look on his face. Gary stood up, walked over to the jar, and leaned in, waving his hand gently over the top to waft the scent toward his nose, just like we were taught in the lab decades ago. He took one shallow sniff and recoiled as if he had been slapped. "Almonds?" He whispered, his face draining of all color. Bitter almonds. And something else. Something floral but wrong. Like foxglove. I stared at him. Foxglove. Digitalis. A heart medication that in the wrong dose stops the heart dead. And bitter almonds usually meant one thing in our line of work. Cyanide. But that was impossible. This was my daughter-in-law. This was a lunch for my son. "You are crazy," I stammered, trying to rationalize the impossible. "It is probably just some exotic nut milk or organic extract. Monica is a yoga instructor, Gary. She does not even kill spiders." Gary grabbed my shoulders, his grip painful. "Thomas, listen to me. That is not food. That is a cocktail. I do not know the exact composition without a mass spectrometer. But my gut tells me there is enough poison in that jar to kill a horse, let alone a man who is already weakened. If Daniel drinks this, he will not make it to dinner." A cold wave of horror washed over me. The note. The note said, "Drink the green jar first." I grabbed my phone and dialed Daniel's number. It rang, and rang, and rang. Voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I looked at the lunchbox. If this was delivered here by mistake, then what did Daniel eat for lunch? Or was this the only lunch? Then it hit me. The delivery driver had 2 bags. I saw them when I signed. 2 identical thermal bags. One for $12.08, one for $12.80. Monica must have ordered something for herself, or maybe she sent a backup. Or maybe the driver fixed his mistake and delivered the other bag to Daniel. I called his office. The receptionist, a young girl named Sarah, who always liked me, picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Bennett," she chirped. "Is everything okay?" "Sarah, listen to me," I barked, my voice cracking. "Is Daniel there? Has he eaten lunch yet? He is in a meeting." "Mr. Bennett. His wife sent over a special meal about 20 minutes ago. He took it into the conference room. He said he needed to boost his energy before the board presentation." My blood ran cold. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The bag at my house was the mistake. The bag at the office was the weapon. "Sarah, go into that room," I shouted, grabbing my car keys. "Go in there right now and stop him. Do not let him take a single sip of anything. Knock the cup out of his hand. If you have to." "Mr. Bennett, I can't just interrupt the board." "Do it!" I screamed, running out the door with Gary close behind me. "Do it, or he is going to die." I hung up and threw myself into the driver's seat of my old Ford truck. Gary jumped in the passenger side, clutching the jar of green death wrapped in a towel. I reversed out of the driveway without checking the mirrors, tires screeching against the asphalt. The drive to Daniel's office usually took 15 minutes. I needed to make it in 5. As I wove through the midday traffic, laying on the horn, my mind flashed back to the last time I saw Daniel. It was 3 days ago. He looked like a ghost. His skin was gray, his eyes sunken. He had snapped at me when I suggested he see a specialist I knew. Monica had been standing behind him, her hand on his shoulder, smiling that serene, patient smile. She had told me, "He is just cleansing toxins, Thomas. You need to trust the process. Trust the process." I slammed my foot on the accelerator, running a red light. I had spent my career analyzing the aftermath of evil. I had weighed organs and measured bullet trajectories. I thought I had left that darkness behind when I retired. I thought my biggest worry would be my cholesterol or my loneliness since my wife passed. But as the speedometer climbed, I realized the darkness had not left. It had just moved into my son's kitchen. Gary was on the phone, with 911, giving them the address of the office, his voice calm and professional, describing symptoms of potential cyanide and digitalis poisoning. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. "Please, God," I whispered, watching the office building grow larger in the windshield. "Please let the courier have been slow. Please let the meeting have started late." But as we screeched into the parking lot, I saw the flashing lights of an ambulance already reflecting off the glass facade of the building. And I knew. I knew we were too late to stop the first sip. The only question now was whether we were too late to save his life. The war for my son had begun, and I had been blind to the enemy sleeping in his bed for years. The speedometer on my truck buried itself past 80 miles per hour as we tore down the interstate. The rain had turned into a deluge drumming against the roof of the cab like 1,000 nervous fingers. Gary was still on the line with emergency services, his voice steady but urgent, relaying the chemical compounds we suspected were currently shutting down my son's organs. I could hear the siren of the ambulance somewhere far behind us, but they were too slow. Everyone was too slow. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly I lost all sensation in my fingertips. Every red light I blew through was a prayer. Please let him be okay. Please let him be late for lunch. I had spent 40 years examining bodies after the soul had left them. I knew exactly what cyanide did. It did not just kill you. It suffocated you from the inside out, while your lungs were full of air. It was a terrifying, agonizing way to go, and the thought of Daniel, my gentle, brilliant boy, facing that alone in his glass-walled office made bile rise in my throat. We skidded off the exit ramp, and I saw the headquarters of Bennett Biotech rising up ahead. It was a modern fortress of steel and glass that Daniel had built from nothing. Usually the sight of it filled me with pride. Today it looked like a tomb. I swerved into the entrance lane, expecting the gate to be open during business hours. It was not. The heavy iron barrier was down. A security guard I did not recognize stepped out of the booth holding up a hand in a stop motion. He looked young, bored, and completely unaware that he was standing between a father and his dying son. I rolled down the window, the rain soaking my arm instantly. "Open the gate!" I screamed over the roar of the engine. "Open it now." The guard shook his head slowly, tapping a clipboard. "I am sorry, sir, but we are on lockdown. Strict orders from Mrs. Bennett. No visitors allowed today, especially family. She said Daniel needs absolute focus for the board meeting." The words hit me like a physical blow. Lockdown, no family. Monica had planned this. She knew I might come. She knew I might figure it out. She had sealed him inside that building to die, ensuring that no one could interrupt the poison doing its work. I did not argue. I did not beg. I looked at the guard, then I looked at the flimsy aluminum of the gate arm. "Move!" I roared. The guard's eyes went wide. He scrambled back into his booth just as I shifted gears and slammed my foot onto the accelerator. The old Ford surged forward with a growl. There was a sickening crunch of metal and plastic as the truck plowed through the barrier. The windshield cracked in a spiderweb pattern, but we were through. I didn't stop until I mounted the curb right in front of the main glass doors, the truck's bumper smoking. I was out of the car before the engine died. Gary was right behind me, clutching his medical bag. We burst through the lobby doors, startling the receptionist and two clients sitting on the plush sofas. "Where is he?" I shouted, ignoring their gasps. "Mr. Bennett," the receptionist stammered, standing up. "You can't be in here," Monica said. "I don't care what Monica said," I yelled, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. I ran past her, heading straight for the executive elevators. My 70-year-old knees screamed in protest, burning with every step, but adrenaline is a powerful drug. I felt like I could punch through a concrete wall. We reached the third floor. The hallway was quiet, deeply carpeted, smelling of expensive air freshener and silence. Too much silence. Daniel's office was at the end of the hall, a corner suite with glass walls. From 20 feet away, I saw him. He was not sitting at his desk. He was on the floor. "Daniel," I screamed, throwing my shoulder against the heavy oak door. It was locked. Of course it was locked. Through the glass, I saw my son convulsing. His back was arched in an unnatural bow, his heels drumming rhythmically against the floor. White foam was gathering at the corners of his mouth, tinged with pink. Gary didn't hesitate. He grabbed a heavy fire extinguisher from the wall mount. "Stand back," he warned. With a grunt of exertion, Gary swung the metal canister. The tempered glass shattered with a sound like a gunshot raining down in a million diamonds. We scrambled through the jagged opening. The smell hit us instantly. It was the same smell from the lunchbox, but stronger here. Bitter almonds and the sweet, sickly scent of death. On the mahogany desk sat the empty jar. The green liquid was gone. I dropped to my knees beside my son. His skin was cold and clammy, his face a terrifying shade of gray-blue. His eyes were rolled back in his head, showing only the whites. He was gasping for air, short, desperate wheezes that sounded like a fish on dry land. "Daniel, look at me, listen to me," I begged, slapping his cheek hard. He didn't respond. His muscles were locked in a rigid spasm. Gary was already checking his pulse. "It is thready," Gary said, his voice tight. "He is going into cardiac arrest. The digitalis is stopping his heart, and the cyanide is starving his brain. We need to get it out of him, now." I knew what I had to do. It was brutal, it was dangerous, but it was his only chance. I pried Daniel's jaw open. His teeth were clenched so hard I thought they would crack. "Sorry, son, I'm so sorry," I whispered. I shoved my fingers deep into his throat, past the tongue pushing down hard to trigger the gag reflex. He bit down. I felt his teeth sink into my knuckles, tearing skin, but I didn't pull back. I pushed deeper. Suddenly his body heaved. A convulsing shudder went through him, and he vomited a thick green bile all over the expensive Persian rug and my shirt. "Good, keep going. Get it all out," Gary shouted, grabbing a trash can to catch the next wave. I kept him on his side to prevent him from choking. He heaved again and again, his body fighting to expel the poison. The smell was acrid and chemical. With every retch, I felt a tiny spark of hope. If he was throwing up, his body was still fighting. Sirens wailed outside louder this time. They were here. "Stay with me, Daniel." "Do not you dare leave me," I commanded, wiping the foam from his mouth with my sleeve. "You are a Bennett. We do not give up." Paramedics burst into the room, their boots crunching on the broken glass. Gary immediately took charge, flashing his old credentials and rattling off information. "Suspected ingestion of cyanide and digitalis cocktail. Administer hydroxycobalamin immediately if you have it. Prepare for cardiac pacing. Do not give him oxygen until the antidote is in." The paramedics worked fast, cutting open Daniel's expensive suit shirt, attaching electrodes to his chest. I was pushed back, my hands covered in my son's vomit and blood from where he had bitten me. I stood against the wall, shaking, watching the jagged line on the heart monitor. It was erratic skipping beats, a chaotic rhythm that terrified me. Then the elevator chimed. I turned, expecting police or more doctors. Instead, Monica walked out. She was dressed in pristine white yoga pants and a matching top. She looked fresh, calm, glowing with health. She held a rolled-up yoga mat under one arm and a green smoothie in the other. She stopped at the shattered glass of the office wall. She did not look at Daniel, who was surrounded by medics fighting for his life. She did not look at the vomit on the floor. She looked at me. Her eyes were cold, devoid of any warmth or concern. She scanned the room, assessing the damage to the office, the broken glass, the ruined carpet. Her gaze landed on the fire extinguisher Gary had used. Then she sighed, a long, exasperated sound of inconvenience. "Really, Thomas," she said, her voice dripping with annoyance. "I leave for 1 hour to go to my meditation class, and you turn my husband's office into a circus." I stared at her, unable to comprehend the level of detachment. "Your husband is dying," I rasped, my voice trembling with rage. "He was poisoned." She rolled her eyes, checking her nails. "Oh, stop being dramatic. He probably just had a panic attack because you barged in here. You know his energy is sensitive right now. I explicitly told security to keep negative influences away." She stepped over a pile of broken glass, not towards her husband, but towards his desk. She reached out and picked up the empty poison jar that Gary had set aside as evidence. "I'll just clean this up," she said casually. "We wouldn't want the paramedics to think we are messy, would we?" That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just greed. This wasn't just a bad marriage. I was looking at a monster who had already buried my son in her mind, and she had absolutely no idea that I was about to dig him back up. The harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room hummed with a sound that drilled straight into my skull. I stood in the corner of the trauma bay, my shirt still stained with my son's vomit, watching a team of strangers work on Daniel. The heart monitor beeped a frantic, irregular rhythm that matched the pounding in my own chest. Gary was speaking in low, urgent tones to the attending physician, a young man named Dr. Evans, who looked exhausted and skeptical. I could hear Gary listing chemical compounds, explaining the half-life of thallium and the immediate effects of cyanide, but I could see in Dr. Evans' eyes that he was not buying it. To him, we were just two old men who had barged into a corporate office and caused a scene. Dr. Evans stepped away from the bed and walked over to me, pulling his gloves off with a snap. "Mr. Bennett," he said. His voice practiced and calm, the kind of voice used to manage difficult relatives. "I appreciate your friend's input, but your son's symptoms are consistent with a severe allergic reaction, or perhaps a panic-induced seizure. We are running a toxicology screen, but standard panels don't look for the exotic poisons you are shouting about. He was poisoned," I insisted, my voice shaking with frustration. "I am a retired forensic examiner, doctor. I know the smell of bitter almonds. I know what digitalis does to the pupils. Look at his eyes. They are dilated, unresponsive. That is not a panic attack." Before Dr. Evans could respond, the curtain was ripped back. Monica swept in. She had somehow managed to fix her hair and compose herself in the ambulance ride over. She looked every inch the terrified, concerned wife. Tears streamed down her face, but they were silent, elegant tears, not the messy sobbing of true grief. She rushed to Daniel's bedside, grabbing his limp hand and pressing it to her cheek. "Oh, Daniel, my love," she whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "I told you not to push yourself so hard. I told you the stress was killing you." She turned to Dr. Evans, her eyes wide and pleading. "Doctor, please, you have to help him. My husband has been suffering from severe anxiety and acute gluten intolerance for months. He has these episodes where he gets confused and his throat closes up. He refuses to take his medication because he thinks he can power through it." She reached into her oversized designer bag and pulled out a thick, color-coded medical binder. I stared at it. Who brings a perfectly organized medical history binder to the emergency room unless they have been planning for this exact moment? "Here," she said, thrusting the file at the doctor. "I keep a log of everything. His diet, his symptoms, his panic attacks. You will see on page 10 that he had a similar reaction last month after accidentally eating soy sauce. It is anaphylaxis mixed with a psychosomatic breakdown." Dr. Evans took the binder, his demeanor softening instantly. He flipped through the pages, nodding. "This is very thorough, Mrs. Bennett. This helps us a lot." I felt the blood boil in my veins. She was rewriting reality right in front of me. She was turning an attempted murder into a dietary mishap. "That is a lie," I barked, stepping forward. I pointed a trembling finger at her. "She fed him that poison. I saw the jar. I smelled it." Monica flinched as if I had struck her. She shrank back against the doctor, looking at me with terrified eyes. "Dad, please," she sobbed. "I know you are confused. I know your memory has not been great lately. But please do not do this here. Not while Daniel is dying." The accusation hung in the air. She was playing the age card. She was painting me as the senile, paranoid father. I saw Dr. Evans shift his stance, moving slightly between me and Monica, a protective instinct kicking in. "I am not confused," I said, forcing myself to lower my voice, trying to sound rational. "I have evidence." I reached into my pocket. During the chaos in the office before Monica had cleared the desk, I had managed to pick up a shard of the broken glass jar from the floor. It was a small, jagged piece, but it still had a few drops of that green sludge clinging to it. It was wrapped in a handkerchief. I pulled it out and unwrapped it with shaking hands. "Test this," I said, holding the shard out to the doctor. "Just run a swab on this residue. If it is just kale juice and vitamins, I will walk out of here and never come back. But if it is poison, you arrest her." Dr. Evans looked at the shard, then at me. He hesitated. For a second, just a split second, I saw his scientific curiosity peak. He reached out his hand to take it. Monica saw it too. Her eyes narrowed, the mask of the grieving wife slipping for a fraction of a second. Suddenly she let out a gasp, her knees buckling. "Oh God, I think I'm going to faint," she cried out. She pitched forward, not toward the floor, but directly toward a nurse who was passing by with a metal tray full of instruments and biohazard waste bags. It was a clumsy, heavy collision. Monica slammed into the nurse, sending the tray flying. Metal clamored against the tile floor. Scalpels, gauze, and used syringes scattered everywhere. In the confusion, Monica flailed her arms, striking my hand hard. The shard of glass flew from my grip. It skittered across the linoleum, sliding under the wheels of a gurney, and vanished into the mess of medical waste that had spilled from the nurse's tray. "No," I shouted, diving for it. Security Dr. Evans yelled, backing away. I was on my hands and knees, frantically sifting through the debris, ignoring the risk of dirty needles. I had to find that glass. It was the only thing that could prove she was lying. But a pair of heavy boots stepped in front of me. Two large hospital security guards hauled me up by my armpits, dragging me away from the mess. "Wait. It is there. You have to find it." I screamed, kicking and struggling. "She did that on purpose. Can't you see she did that on purpose?" Monica was being helped up by the nurse she had tackled. She looked shaken, apologetic, and perfectly innocent. "I am so sorry," she wept. "I just got so dizzy. Please do not let him hurt anyone." Dr. Evans looked at me with a mixture of pity and professional sternness. "Mr. Bennett, you are disrupting a critical care environment. Your daughter-in-law is right. You are clearly under a great deal of stress, and you are imagining things. There was no poison. This is a medical emergency, not a crime scene." He turned to the guards. "Escort him to the waiting room. If he tries to re-enter the trauma bay, call the police." "But Daniel," I shouted as they dragged me backward. "She is going to kill him." Monica looked over the doctor's shoulder. She met my eyes one last time before the curtain closed. She didn't smile. She didn't sneer. She just looked at me with a blank, dead expression that was more terrifying than any threat. She had won. She had destroyed the evidence, turned the doctor against me, and now she was alone with my son again. The doors to the trauma bay swung shut, cutting off my view of Daniel. I was left standing in the sterile hallway, gasping for breath, my hands empty, my credibility shattered. Gary was at my side, his hand on my shoulder, his face grim. "We lost the sample." Gary whispered, his voice heavy with defeat. I looked at the closed doors. "We lost the sample." I agreed, feeling a cold resolve settle in my gut, where the panic used to be. But we did not lose the war. She thinks I am just a confused old man. She thinks she broke me. I straightened my jacket, wiping the sweat from my forehead. Let her think that I said. Let her think she won. Because if she thinks I am crazy, she won't see me coming next time. And next time I won't be bringing a glass shard. I will be bringing a sledgehammer. The automatic doors to the recovery room slid open with a soft hiss that sounded far too loud in the quiet corridor. I had been pacing the hallway for an hour, my eyes burning from the harsh fluorescent lights and the stinging residue of unshed tears. A nurse finally waved me over, her expression, stern, warning me without words that this was my one and only chance to see him. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the trembling in my hands, and walked into the dimly lit room where my son lay. Daniel looked smaller than I had ever seen him. The hospital bed swallowed him up, making him look less like the 38-year-old CEO of a biotech company and more like the fragile boy I used to carry to bed when he fell asleep on the couch. His skin was the color of old parchment, translucent and sickly, and there were tubes running into his nose and arms. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only thing assuring me that he was still in this world. Monica was there, of course. She was sitting in the uncomfortable plastic chair right next to his pillow, holding his hand with both of hers. She had positioned herself perfectly, blocking my path to him, acting as the gatekeepers to his consciousness. When I entered, she looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, a masterpiece of performed grief, but behind the tears, I saw the steel. She gave me a tiny, sad shake of her head, as if to say, "Oh, look what you have done." I ignored her and moved to the other side of the bed. Daniel's eyes fluttered open. They were glassy, unfocused, swimming in a haze of sedatives and exhaustion. When his gaze finally landed on me, I expected to see relief. I expected to see the realization that his father had come to save him. Instead, I saw fear. "Dad." He croaked, his voice dry and cracking like dead leaves. "Why are you here?" I leaned in close, keeping my voice low and gentle. "I am here to make sure you are safe, son. You gave us a scare today." He pulled his hand away from Monica and rubbed his face, wincing as the IV line pulled at his skin. "Monica said you caused a scene. She said you broke into the office and destroyed everything." "Why can't you just let me work, Dad? Why do you always have to ruin things?" The accusation hit me harder than a physical blow. I looked at him, stunned. "Daniel, listen to me. I did not ruin anything. I saved you. That lunch, that juice Monica sent, it had poison in it. Gary and I smelled it. We got there just in time to get it out of your system." Daniel squeezed his eyes shut and shook his head, a gesture of pure frustration. "Stop it. Just stop it. There was no poison. Monica told me what happened. She said you and Gary came in screaming like lunatics about cyanide. It was a panic attack, Dad. I have been under so much pressure with the merger, and my body just shut down." He looked at Monica, seeking reassurance, and she squeezed his hand, nodding sympathetically. "See, Daniel? I told you he was confused. Your father is getting old, honey. He sees danger where there is only love." "No," I said, my voice rising slightly despite my best efforts to stay calm. "This is not age, Daniel. This is facts. You have been sick for 6 months. You are losing hair. You can barely walk. And today you almost died. That is not stress. That is thallium. That is digitalis. She is feeding it to you." Daniel's eyes snapped open, and for the first time there was genuine anger in them. "Don't you dare. Don't you dare talk about her like that. Monica is the only reason I am still standing. She blends my meals. She manages my schedule. She sat up with me for 3 nights in a row when I couldn't breathe last week. Where were you, Dad? You were at home watching baseball. She is the one saving me, and you are the one trying to tear us apart." I felt like I was screaming underwater. The gaslighting was total. She had rewritten his reality so completely that he viewed his executioner as his savior and his rescuer as his enemy. She had isolated him, made him dependent, and then convinced him that his symptoms were his own fault. I reached out to touch his arm, desperate to make a connection. "Daniel, look at me. I am your father. I have never lied to you." As I reached for his hand, his hospital gown shifted slightly. The sleeve rode up his forearm, exposing the pale skin of his inner elbow. I froze. There, right in the crook of his arm, was a small, angry red puncture mark. It was surrounded by a faint yellowish bruise that looked a few days old. And next to it, barely visible, was another one fading. Daniel hated needles. He had a phobia of them since he was a child. He would never let anyone stick him unless it was absolutely necessary. "What is this?" I asked, pointing at the mark. "Since when do you take injections?" Daniel looked down, confused. I don't know." Before he could answer, Monica's hand shot out. She grabbed his sleeve and yanked it down, covering the marks with a speed that was almost violent. "Those are his B12 shots," she said quickly, her voice sharp. "The doctor prescribed them for his energy levels. I give them to him myself so he doesn't have to go to the clinic." "You are lying," I said, staring at her. "You are not a nurse. You have no medical training. And B12 shots go in the muscle, not the vein. You are injecting something directly into his bloodstream." I looked back at Daniel, pleading. "Son, tell me you see this. She is injecting you with something. That is why you are getting worse." Daniel looked from me to Monica. He looked confused, scared. For a second, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He looked at his arm, then at his wife. Monica saw it too. She immediately burst into tears, burying her face in the mattress. "I can't take this anymore, Daniel," she sobbed, her voice muffled by the sheets. "I do everything for you. I sacrifice everything. And he stands there and accuses me of hurting you. Maybe I should just leave. Maybe you would be better off without me." The threat of abandonment worked instantly. Daniel's face crumbled. The fear of being alone, of being sick without her, overwhelmed any logic I had tried to instill. "No, Monica, don't say that," he pleaded, reaching for her hair. Then he turned to me, and his expression was cold, hard, and final. "Get out," he said. "Daniel!" I said, "Get out!" he screamed. His voice cracked high and hysterical. The heart monitor on the wall began to race, beeping faster and faster. "Get out before I call the police. You are crazy. You are trying to destroy my marriage because you are lonely and bitter. I never want to see you again." The door behind me burst open. 2 large security guards and Dr. Evans rushed in. "Mr. Bennett, that is enough," the doctor said, grabbing my arm. "You are upsetting the patient. I need you to leave the premises immediately." I didn't fight them this time. I couldn't. All the fight had drained out of me the moment my son looked at me with that hatred. I let them drag me away from the bed. I watched Monica lift her head from the mattress. She wasn't crying anymore. She was stroking Daniel's hair, whispering in his ear, calming him down. As the guards pushed me out into the hallway, I looked back one last time. Daniel was clinging to her, burying his face in her shoulder like a frightened child. He was hugging the very thing that was killing him. The heavy doors swung shut, cutting off the sound of the beeping monitor. I stood in the hallway, the security guard's hand heavy on my shoulder. "This way, sir," he said, not unkindly. "And please stay away. If you come back, we will have to file a restraining order." I walked to the elevator, my legs feeling like lead. I had lost. Logic had failed. Evidence had failed. Love had failed. Monica had built a fortress of lies around my son, and the walls were too thick for me to break down with bare hands. But as the elevator doors closed, shutting out the hospital floor, my mind went back to that mark on his arm. A vein injection. That meant the poison wasn't just in the food. She was escalating. She was speeding up the process. I wiped my face. The despair was still there, heavy and suffocating, but beneath it, a cold, hard rage began to solidify. If I couldn't save him as a father, I would have to save him as a forensic examiner. If I couldn't get him to listen to the truth, I would have to drag the truth out into the light, kicking and screaming. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I dialed Gary. "Gary," I said, my voice steady for the first time in hours. "Did you get the sample?" he asked. "No," I said. "But I saw something better, or worse. She is injecting him, Gary. We don't have a week. We probably have days." There was a silence on the other end. Then Gary spoke, his voice grim. "Then we stop playing by the rules, Thomas. If she wants to play doctor, let's see how she handles a second opinion. Meet me at the lab. We are going to dig through her trash." I hung up the phone as the elevator dinged on the ground floor. I walked out of the hospital into the pouring rain. I was banned from the building. My son hated me. I had no evidence. But as I walked to my truck, I didn't feel defeated anymore. I felt dangerous. Monica thought she had isolated her victim. She forgot that by kicking me out, she had just freed me to hunt her down. The restraining order was taped to my front door the next morning. It was a standard legal document, cold and impersonal, stating that Thomas Bennett was to stay at least 500 feet away from Daniel and Monica Bennett at all times. To the law, I was a harasser. To the hospital staff, I was a senile old man. But as I stood on my porch, staring at that piece of paper, I did not feel fear or shame. I felt clarity. The law stops at the property line, but the truth does not. If I could not walk through the front door, I would have to find another way to see inside that house. For the next 3 days, I lived in my truck. I parked it 2 blocks down from Daniel's house, hidden behind a row of overgrown hedges at the edge of the community park. I watched the comings and goings through a pair of high-powered binoculars I had kept from my days surveillance tracking crime scenes. I watched Monica leave in the morning, looking fresh and vibrant in her yoga clothes. I watched delivery drivers drop off packages, but I never saw Daniel. The blinds in the master bedroom remained drawn tight and unyielding, turning my son's home into a black box. I knew I needed to get closer, but the security cameras Monica had installed were everywhere. She had turned that house into a fortress. However, there is one thing that leaves every fortress eventually. One thing that people discard without thinking, assuming it disappears into the void. Garbage. In my 40 years as a forensic examiner, I learned that people lie to their priests, they lie to their spouses, and they lie to themselves. But they never lie to their trash can. The garbage tells you what they eat, what they buy, what they break, and what they try to hide. Thursday morning was pickup day. The heavy rumble of the sanitation truck echoed down the quiet suburban street at 6 in the morning. I waited until the truck was just turning the corner onto Daniel's street. I pulled my Ford out and intercepted it before it reached the house. I rolled down my window and waved a $50 bill at the driver. He was a big man with a beard, looking tired and ready for his shift to be over. He hit the brakes, eyeing the cash. "I need a favor," I said, leaning out. "The blue bin at 1280. The big house with the gray siding. Do not dump it in the compactor. Just hand me the bags." The driver looked at the money, then at me. He didn't ask questions. In his line of work, he had probably seen weirder things than an old man wanting a specific bag of trash. He snatched the bill. "Make it quick, Pops," he grunted. I followed the truck at a distance. When he stopped at Daniel's house, he grabbed the 2 black heavy-duty bags from the curb. Instead of tossing them into the crushing jaws of the truck, he dropped them behind a bush near the end of the driveway, as we had agreed. He drove off, and 10 seconds later, I swung by, threw the bags into the bed of my pickup, and sped away before Monica could look out the window. I drove straight to my garage. I laid out a plastic tarp on the concrete floor, put on a pair of latex gloves, and a face mask. I pulled the first bag onto the tarp and ripped it open. The smell was immediate and revolting. It was a mix of rotting vegetable matter and something chemically sweet. I began the slow, methodical process of sorting. This was not just digging. This was archaeology. Every receipt, every wrapper, every scrap of paper had to be examined. Most of it was what you would expect from Monica's public persona. Kale stems, empty cartons of almond milk, organic tofu wrappers. But as I dug deeper past the layer of performative health food, I found the secrets. Hidden inside an empty oatmeal container stuffed at the bottom, to conceal it was a small, crushed cardboard box. It had no English on it. The text was Spanish. I smoothed it out. It was a medication box from a pharmacy in Tijuana. There was no patient name, no dosage instructions, just a generic label that translated to dietary supplement. I opened it. Empty. But there was a fine white powder residue in the corners. I scraped it carefully into an evidence bag. I kept digging. The second bag was heavier. Inside, wrapped in 3 layers of paper towels, I found a glass vial. It had been smashed, but the label was partially intact. It was an industrial label, not a medical one. The logo was for a chemical supply warehouse in Oregon, a place that sold bulk compounds for manufacturing and photography. I held the jagged glass up to the light. The letters were faded, but I could make out the chemical code. TL-SUL, thallium sulfate. My blood ran cold. Thallium, the poisoner's poison. Historically used as rat killer and in old-school photo developing. It was colorless, odorless, and tasteless. It dissolved perfectly in water or juice. And the symptoms matches Daniel's condition perfectly. The hair loss, the nerve pain in the feet, the confusion. It is a slow, agonizing way to die as the body's cells are literally torn apart from the inside. But why did she have a receipt for photo-developing chemicals? Monica did not own a camera. She took all her photos on her phone. I smoothed out a crumpled ball of paper I found near the bottom of the bag. It was a shipping invoice. The date was from 2 weeks ago. The item listed was Developer Fixer, Bulk, but underneath in the Special Instructions section there was a note. Please ensure plain packaging. I sat back on my heels, surrounded by the filth of my son's household, and the picture finally came into focus. Monica wasn't just buying poison off the street. She was synthesizing it. She was buying industrial-grade chemicals under the guise of a hobby she didn't have, extracting the toxins and feeding them to my son. And then I realized something else, something that made my stomach turn. There were no cooking scraps in the trash. No onion peels, no carrot tops, no eggshells. The kale stems I found earlier were old, slimy, clearly discarded days ago. If she was making him fresh juice every day, where was the waste? Where was the pulp from the juicer? There was none. She wasn't making the juice in the kitchen. I closed my eyes and visualized the layout of Daniel's house. I knew that house. I helped him pay for the down payment. The kitchen was an open concept visible from the living room and the hallway. If Daniel was home even sick in bed, he might hear a juicer or see her chopping. But off the master bedroom, there was a large private ensuite bathroom. It had a heavy door that locked from the inside. It had a deep sink and marble countertops. I looked at the trash again. I found a small empty bottle of bleach and a pair of heavy-duty rubber gloves that were stained with a dark greenish-brown substance. Not food stains, chemical burns. She was not cooking dinner in the kitchen. She was mixing a chemical weapon in the bathroom. I stood up, peeling off my gloves. My breathing was fast and shallow. The image of Monica, beautiful and smiling, standing over the bathroom sink wearing those rubber gloves, carefully measuring out rat poison into a glass of expensive green juice, chilled me to the bone. She would mix it, maybe add a little sweetener to mask the metallic taste, unlock the door, put a smile on her face, and walk into the bedroom to feed it to the man who loved her. I had the proof of purchase. I had the residue. But it was all circumstantial. The police would say the chemicals could be for anything. They would say the Spanish pills were just vitamins. I needed to catch her in the act. I needed to see inside that bathroom. I looked at the pile of garbage one last time. It was a map of a murder in progress, and it told me exactly where I needed to look next. I couldn't walk through the front door, but I knew a way in that Monica, for all her careful planning, had forgotten about. The old security system. 5 years ago, before Daniel met Monica, I had helped him install a hardwired fire alarm system. It had smoke detectors in every room, including the master bedroom and the hallway. And because Daniel traveled a lot back then, he had paid extra for the detectors that had built-in low-resolution heat sensors and cameras for remote monitoring. When Monica moved in, she had made him upgrade to a fancy voice-activated smart home system. She replaced the doorbells and the exterior cameras, but she never replaced the smoke detectors. They were hardwired into the ceiling. They were boring. They were invisible. And I still had the master administrator password. I grabbed my laptop from the workbench, my hands trembling with a mix of adrenaline and rage. I wiped the grime from the garbage off my fingers and typed in the IP address. If she was in that house and if she was mixing that poison, I was going to see it. And once I saw it, I wasn't just going to call the police. I was going to make sure the whole world saw it too. I sat in the darkness of my garage, the only light coming from the glow of my laptop screen. My fingers hovered over the enter key. This was the moment of truth. 5 years ago, when I helped Daniel install the fire safety system, I insisted on the high-end model. Hardwired smoke detectors with built-in thermal sensors and low-resolution backup cameras. It was designed to detect the source of a fire instantly, but right now I was praying it would detect a different kind of threat. Monica had changed the Wi-Fi, the locks, and the alarm codes, but she had never touched the fire safety loop. It was too boring for her to notice, and that arrogance was about to be her undoing. I typed in the master administrative password I had written down in an old notebook years ago. The screen flickered. A spinning wheel appeared, mocking my impatience. Connect. I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. Just connect. The screen went black for a second, and then a grainy grayscale image popped up. It was the master bedroom. The camera angle was high, looking down from the ceiling corner, giving the room a distorted fish-eye perspective. But the image was clear enough to break my heart. My son was lying in the center of the bed, propped up by pillows. Even in the low-quality video, the devastation of his body was undeniable. He was not just sick, he was wasting away. His movements were jerky and uncoordinated, his hands trembling as they rested on the duvet. But what made me gasp was his head. Daniel had always had a thick head of dark hair just like his mother. Now there were large, visible patches of scalp shining in the dim light. Clumps of hair were scattered on the pillowcase around him like fallen leaves. His skin, even in black and white, looked ashen and gray, pulled tight over his cheekbones. The door to the bedroom opened. Monica walked in. She was carrying a silver tray. On it sat a steaming bowl and a glass of water. She walked with a bounce in her step, a terrifying contrast to the dying man in the bed. I leaned closer to the screen, squinting, wishing I could reach through the monitor and strangle her. She set the tray on the nightstand. Then she did something that made my blood freeze. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a small paper packet. It looked exactly like the crushed box I had found in the trash. She unfolded it and tapped a generous amount of white powder into the soup. She did not look around. She did not hesitate. She stirred it in with a spoon, humming a tune I could not quite hear, but could see in the bobbing of her head. It was casual. It was routine. It was the banality of evil in its purest form. She turned to Daniel. He shrank back into the pillows, shaking his head weaky. I turned up the volume on my laptop. The audio was tinny and filled with static, but I heard them. "No, Monica, please." Daniel rasped his voice, sounding like sandpaper. "I am not hungry. My stomach hurts so much." "You have to eat, baby." Monica cooed, her voice sickeningly sweet. "It is just organic mushroom soup. It will help flush out the toxins. You know the doctor said you need to keep your strength up for the treatments." "I don't want it," Daniel cried, a tear tracking through the hollow of his cheek. "It makes my feet burn. Every time I eat, my feet feel like they are on fire." "That is the neuropathy, silly," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "That means the healing is working. Now open wide." She brought the spoon to his lips. He clamped his mouth shut, turning his head away. The sweetness vanished from her face instantly. She grabbed his jaw with her free hand, her fingers digging into his cheeks with bruising force. "I said, eat it," she hissed. "I spent all afternoon making this for you. Do not be an ungrateful brat." She forced the spoon into his mouth. Daniel gagged, coughing, but he swallowed. He had no strength to fight her. I watched tears streaming down my own face as she fed him spoonful after spoonful of that poisoned broth. Every swallow was a nail in his coffin. I was witnessing my son's murder in real time, broadcasted over a Wi-Fi signal, and I was powerless to stop it right then and there. If I called the police now, by the time they got past the gate and the locked doors, she would have flushed the bowl and played the innocent wife. I needed more. I needed the endgame. Finally, the bowl was empty. Daniel slumped back against the pillows, exhausted and defeated. He looked like a broken doll. "Good boy," Monica said, wiping his mouth roughly with a napkin. "See, that wasn't so hard. Now go to sleep." She stood up and walked out of the frame, leaving Daniel alone in the dark. But she didn't leave the room. I switched the camera feed to the hallway sensor, but she wasn't there. She was in the ensuite bathroom, the laboratory. I switched to the sensor in the bathroom. It was dark, but the heat signature showed her standing by the window. She had her phone to her ear. I cranked the volume to the maximum. "Hey, it is me," she said. Her voice was different now. No longer the sweet wife, no longer the stern nurse. It was cold, businesslike, and triumphant. "Yeah, he just finished the latest dose," she continued, looking out the window at the rain. "He is fading fast. Honestly, I don't think he will last the weekend. His kidneys are shutting down. He is pissing blood." I hit the record button on my screen capture software. My hand was shaking so bad, I almost missed the mouse click. "What? No, don't worry about the old man." She laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. "I got a restraining order. He can't get within 500 feet of us without going to jail. He is out of the picture. We are in the clear." She paused, listening to the person on the other end. Yes, I have the papers ready, she said. The power of attorney is already signed. I just need him to sign the final transfer of the biotech shares. I am going to guide his hand tomorrow when he is groggy. He won't even know what he is signing. Just make sure you are ready on your end to liquidate the assets the second the notification comes through. I want that money in the offshore account before his body is even cold. She laughed again. $32 million, baby. We are going to be kings. All right. Love you too. Bye. She hung up and walked out of the bathroom, disappearing from the feed. I sat back in my chair, the silence of the garage deafening. I stopped the recording. I saved the file to 3 different hard drives and emailed a copy to Gary. $32 million. That was the price of my son's life. She wasn't just killing him, she was liquidating him. I looked at the frozen image of Daniel on the screen. He looked like he was already dead, but he wasn't, not yet. I felt a cold calm settle over me. The tears were gone. The panic was gone. All that was left was a mission. I knew who she was talking to. There was only one person who could facilitate a stock transfer that massive and that fast. It had to be someone on the inside. Someone who knew the company's finances better than Daniel did. I closed the laptop. I had the evidence of the crime. Now I needed the identity of the partner. Monica thought she was the hunter closing in on her wounded prey. She didn't realize that the old wolf she had chased away was not running. I was circling back, and I was bringing the whole pack with me. I grabbed my keys. It was time to pay a visit to the only other person who had access to those accounts. It was time to find the other half of this murder pact. I waited in my truck down the street, the engine cold, but my blood boiling hot. It was raining again, a relentless Seattle drizzle that turned the world gray and blurry. At 9 o'clock sharp, the garage door to my son's house opened. Monica's white Range Rover backed out. She was wearing her Lululemon gear hair tied back in a perfect ponytail, looking every bit the devoted wife heading to her morning yoga session to find inner peace while her husband lay dying in a bed of her making. I did not turn on my headlights. I let her get a block ahead before I eased the Ford out of its hiding spot behind the hedges. She drove with the confidence of someone who believes she is untouchable. She thought I was neutralized, banned by a piece of paper and the threat of jail. She did not know that a father's love respects no law, and his rage respects no boundaries. I expected her to turn left toward the upscale wellness center in Bellevue, where she claimed to spend her mornings. Instead, she turned right, heading toward the highway on-ramp. I kept my distance 3 cars back, blending into the morning traffic. We drove south, leaving the manicured lawns and gated communities behind, venturing into the industrial district near the airport. This was a part of town where the buildings were low, the windows were barred, and the businesses were cash only. She pulled into the parking lot of the Golden Key Motel. It was a rundown U-shaped building with peeling yellow paint and a neon sign that flickered with a dying buzz. It was the kind of place people went to hide things they were ashamed of. Monica parked her $80,000 car between a rusted sedan and a dumpster. The contrast was screamingly obvious. She checked her mirror, then stepped out. She pulled a baseball cap low over her eyes and hurried toward room 104. I pulled into the lot of a diner across the street, killing the engine. I grabbed my camera with the telephoto lens. My hands were steady now. The tremor of fear I had felt at the hospital was gone, replaced by the cold precision of the hunt. I focused the lens on the door of room 104. 10 minutes passed. Then a black BMW pulled in. It was sleek-tinted and aggressive. The driver didn't park near Monica. He parked on the far side of the lot in the shadows. The door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a trench coat over a suit that cost more than my truck. He looked out of place here like a shark swimming in a sewer. He walked briskly to room 104 and knocked twice. The door opened instantly. Monica pulled him inside. I snapped 3 photos in rapid succession before the door closed. But I didn't need the zoom lens to know who he was. I felt the bile rise in my throat, a bitter taste of betrayal that rivaled the poison in my son's veins. It was Marcus Thorne. Marcus was not just a stranger. He was the chief financial officer of Bennett Biotech. He was Daniel's college roommate. He was the best man at their wedding. He was the godfather to the children Daniel hoped to have one day. Daniel trusted Marcus with his life, and more importantly, he trusted him with the company's money. I sat back in my seat, the camera heavy in my lap. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with a deafening clarity. For months, Daniel had been complaining about money. He told me the company was bleeding cash, that investors were pulling out, that there were accounting errors he couldn't fix because he was too sick to focus. He said the stress of the impending bankruptcy was what was making him ill. He said he was a failure. But Bennett Biotech was not failing. It held patents worth millions. The only way it could be losing money was if someone was drilling a hole in the hull and draining the fuel. Marcus. It was the perfect pincer movement. Monica attacked the body with thallium, making Daniel weak, confused, and unable to read a balance sheet. Marcus attacked the mind, fabricating financial crises, whispering in Daniel's ear that the company was collapsing, that he was incompetent, that he needed to sign over control to save what was left. They were gaslighting him on a corporate scale. I watched the window of room 104. The curtains were drawn, but there was a gap. I raised the camera again, maxing out the zoom. Through the sliver of space, I didn't see a romantic tryst. I saw business. Monica was sitting on the edge of the bed, not hugging Marcus, but handing him a thick stack of documents. Marcus was flipping through them, nodding, pointing at signature lines. He pulled a laptop out of his bag and set it on the rickety table. Monica leaned over his shoulder, pointing at the screen. They were executing a trade. I closed my eyes and did the math. I knew Daniel's financials because I had helped him set up his initial trust. He had a Keyman life insurance policy worth $20 million payable to the company in the event of the CEO's death. If Marcus controlled the company, he controlled that payout. And then there was Daniel's personal equity, his shares, his real estate. Another $30 million easily. $50 million. That was the bounty. They weren't just lovers. They were business partners in a slaughterhouse. They had turned my son into a commodity, a golden goose that was worth more dead than alive. I watched as Marcus laughed at something Monica said. It was a relaxed, arrogant laugh. They were celebrating. They thought they had won. They thought Daniel was a vegetable who would quietly stop breathing in a few days, leaving them with a fortune and a grieving widow narrative that the media would eat up. I took a deep breath, forcing the red haze of anger to recede. I needed to be cold. I needed to be calculating. I snapped a dozen more photos documenting every second of their meeting. I photographed Marcus, handing Monica a small brown paper bag. More supplies from the dark web, no doubt. I photographed the kiss they shared at the door when he left, a kiss that lacked passion but was full of conspiratorial greed. As Marcus drove away in his black BMW, I looked at the image of his face on my camera screen. I remembered the last time I saw him. He had visited Daniel in the hospital, holding his hand, looking somber, telling him not to worry about work, telling him to just rest. "You are a dead man walking, Marcus." I whispered to the empty cab of my truck. I started the engine. I had the who, I had the how, and now I had the why. The picture was complete. But a picture is not a weapon unless you know how to use it. I wasn't going to the police yet. The police would take weeks to subpoena financial records. They would get bogged down in red tape while my son took his last breath. No, I needed something faster. I needed to cut the head off the snake. I watched Monica leave the motel 10 minutes later. She looked happy. She checked her makeup in the rearview mirror, applied fresh lipstick, and drove back toward the suburbs to play the role of the grieving wife. I let her go. I didn't follow her this time. I had a different destination. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in 20 years. It was a number for a man named Saul, a forensic accountant, who used to work with the DA's office before he got fired for being too good at breaking into encrypted servers. He was expensive, he was unethical, and he was exactly what I needed. "Saul," I said when he answered. "It is Thomas Bennett. I have a job. I need you to rip apart a company's ledger. I need you to find where $50 million is hiding, and I need it by tonight. I drove out of the motel parking lot, leaving the grime and the secrets behind. I was going to drain their accounts. I was going to expose their fraud. I was going to make sure that when they went to prison, they wouldn't even have enough money to buy a candy bar at the commissary. The war had shifted fronts. They attacked my son's body. I was about to attack their god, their money. I pulled my truck into the alleyway 3 streets over from Daniel's house. I was not Thomas Bennett, retired forensic examiner. I was just a nameless man in blue coveralls with a generic tool belt and a cap pulled low over my eyes. I had spent 40 years collecting evidence from crime scenes after the yellow tape was already up, but today I was stepping into the crime scene while the killer was still holding the weapon. I waited until I saw Monica's white Range Rover disappear around the corner. She was heading to the bank, probably to set up the offshore accounts she had discussed with Marcus. I gave her a 5-minute head start, then I moved. I didn't use the front door. I went around the back to the maintenance shed where the central air conditioning unit hummed. I cut the power line to the compressor. It was a clean cut. Inside the house, the temperature would start rising immediately. In a smart home like Daniel's, this would send an error alert to the main panel, but it would not trigger the burglar alarm. It was a calculated risk. I needed a reason to be there if a neighbor saw me, just a repairman fixing a broken unit. I used the spare key I had hidden inside a fake rock in the garden 5 years ago. Monica had changed the locks, but she hadn't found the rock. I prayed she hadn't changed the back door deadbolt. The key slid in. It turned. The mechanism clicked with a sound that felt like a gunshot in the silence of the afternoon. I slipped inside. The air in the house was stale, heavy with the scent of lavender air freshener, trying to mask the underlying smell of sickness. It smelled like a hospital room. I moved silent and fast, my work boots making no sound on the hardwood floors. I went straight up the stairs, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. The master bedroom door was ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The curtains were drawn, plunging the room into a perpetual twilight. Daniel was there, lying in the center of the massive king-sized bed. My breath hitched in my throat. Seeing him on a grainy camera feed was one thing. Seeing him in person was a nightmare. He was skeletal. His cheekbones jutted out sharply against papery skin that had turned a terrifying shade of grayish-green. His mouth was open, breathing in shallow, rattling gasps. "Daniel," I whispered, kneeling beside the bed. He didn't wake up. He was deep in a toxic stupor. I reached out and touched his forehead. It was burning hot, yet his hands were ice cold. This was the classic sign of systemic organ failure. The thallium was shutting down his thermoregulation. I didn't have time to cry. I had to be a professional. I opened my tool bag and took out a pair of sterile surgical scissors and a Ziploc evidence bag. "Forgive me, son," I whispered. I gently lifted his head. The hair at the nape of his neck was brittle and thin. I isolated a thick lock near the root. Hair follicles act like a timeline for heavy metal poisoning. This lock of hair would tell the story of every dose she had fed him for the last 6 months. Snip. The sound was tiny, but it felt violent. I dropped the hair into the bag and sealed it. Next, I needed DNA and fresh fluids. I looked at the pillowcase. It was stained with sweat and saliva. I grabbed the spare pillow from the chair, swapped it out, and shoved the dirty pillowcase into my shirt. Just as I was about to stand up, Daniel stirred. His eyes fluttered open, but they didn't focus on me. They looked through me. "Dad," he mumbled, his voice a dry croak. I froze. "I am here, Daniel. I am here." "Dad, don't let the monsters in," he whimpered, a tear leaking from the corner of his eye. "They are in the juice. The monsters are in the juice." He knew. Somewhere deep in his subconscious, through the haze of gaslighting and poison, he knew. I squeezed his hand. "I am going to kill the monster's son. I promise." Suddenly, the sound of the garage door rumbling open vibrated through the floorboards. She was back. She wasn't supposed to be back for an hour. Panic flared in my chest. I couldn't run to the door. The stairs were right in front of the garage entrance. I looked around wildly. The bathroom was a dead end. The window was a 20-foot drop. The closet. I dove into the walk-in closet, scrambling behind a rack of Daniel's expensive suits that hung there like ghosts of the man he used to be. I pulled the door almost shut, leaving a tiny crack. I held my breath, my hand clamped over my mouth. I heard her footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, fast, angry. She burst into the bedroom. "God, it is hot in here," she complained. "Why is the AC off?" She walked over to the bed. I could see her through the slats of the closet door. She stood over Daniel, hands on her hips. She didn't check his temperature. She didn't adjust his blankets. She looked at him with pure disgust. "Are you still sleeping?" she sighed loudly. "You are so useless, Daniel. Marcus is waiting for the transfer, and I am stuck here babysitting a vegetable." She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "Yeah, the AC is down," she said to someone on the line. "No, I don't know why. I'll call a repairman later. Look, did the bank approve the wire?" "Good." "No, he is still breathing, unfortunately." She laughed. It was a cold, short sound. "I'll give him the booster dose tonight. Don't worry. By Monday you will be the CEO, and I will be the grieving widow on the front page of the Seattle Times. Just make sure the yacht is ready for next week. I need a vacation after this." She hung up and tossed the phone on the bed. She walked toward the closet. My heart stopped. If she opened this door, if she found me, it would be over. I gripped the heavy wrench in my pocket. I didn't want to hurt her, not yet. Not until she was behind bars, but I would not let her stop me from saving my son. She reached for the handle. Then Daniel moaned. A loud, pained sound from the bed. She stopped. She turned back to him, annoyed. "What now?" she snapped. She walked back to the bed. I seized the moment. As soon as her back was turned, I slipped out of the closet, moving like a shadow. I crawled on my hands and knees behind the chaise lounge, inching toward the bedroom door. "Shut up, Daniel, just go back to sleep," she yelled at him. I reached the hallway. I stood up and ran. I didn't care about the noise now. I bolted down the stairs, out the back door, and sprinted across the lawn. I heard her scream from the window upstairs. "Who is there?" I didn't look back. I jumped the back fence, tearing my coveralls, and landed in the alley. I ran to my truck, threw the evidence bags on the passenger seat, and peeled out of there, my hands shaking so hard I could barely steer. 20 minutes later, I was at Gary's private lab. Gary didn't say a word when I walked in. He saw the look on my face. He took the bag of hair and the pillowcase. He fired up the mass spectrometer. We sat in silence for an hour watching the machine hum. The graph on the monitor began to spike. It climbed higher and higher, a jagged red line that looked like a mountain range of death. Gary took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "He looked sick, Thomas," he said quietly. "Give it to me straight, Gary." "The concentration of thallium in his hair root is over 400 milligrams, Gary said, pointing at the screen. "And the pillowcase, it is saturated with it. She is not just poisoning him slowly anymore. She is overdosing him." "How long?" I asked, my voice hollow. Gary looked at the graph, then at me. His kidneys are functioning at maybe 10%. His heart is under massive strain. "Thomas, if she gives him that booster dose she talked about, he won't wake up tomorrow. But even without it, at this level of toxicity..." He paused, taking a deep breath. "He has a week, maybe less. If we don't get him on dialysis and chelating agents immediately, his organs will liquefy. You have to get him out of that house. Tonight." I looked at the red line on the screen. It wasn't just data. It was a countdown. "I can't get him out," I said, staring at the evidence. "The police won't move fast enough. They will need a warrant. They will need a judge. By the time they get through the red tape, Daniel will be in a body bag." "Then what are you going to do?" Gary asked. I stood up, grabbing the printout of the results. "I am done playing by the rules, Gary. I tried being a father. I tried being a detective. Now I am going to be exactly what she called me, a monster." I walked to the door. Call Saul. Tell him to get the financial records ready. I am going to host a dinner party, and I am going to make sure Monica is the main course. I sat in my truck outside Gary's lab clutching the toxicology report that was essentially my son's death warrant. The urge to drive straight to the police station was overwhelming, but 40 years in forensics had taught me that the law is a blunt instrument. If I went now, Monica would claim the chemicals were for cleaning, or worse, she would claim Daniel took them himself. She had the medical records, the suicidal depression narrative, and the power of attorney. She would walk free, and Daniel would be left in her care until he stopped breathing. No. To catch a predator like Monica, you don't chase her. You bait her. You have to offer her something she wants more than safety. Greed was her engine, so I had to pour fuel into it until the engine exploded. I drove home, my mind racing. I needed a performance. I needed to be the weak, defeated old man she already thought I was. I walked into my bathroom and looked in the mirror. I looked tired, yes, but not dying. I needed to look worse. I didn't shave. I rubbed a little gray eyeshadow under my eyes to deepen the hollows. I put on a stained cardigan that hung loose on my frame. Then I picked up the phone. My hand hovered over the dial pad. This was the most important lie I would ever tell. I dialed her number. It rang 4 times. She was probably screening me, deciding if I was worth the effort. Hello? Her voice was sharp, impatient. Monica, I rasped. I held the phone away from my mouth slightly to sound distant, weaker. Monica, please do not hang up. What do you want, Thomas? The restraining order says you can't call us. I can have you arrested right now. I know I coughed a dry hacking sound that rattled in my chest. I know. And I don't care anymore. The police, they don't matter where I am going. There was a pause. Her curiosity was piqued. What are you talking about? I went to the doctor today. I lied, injecting a tremor into my voice. It is pancreatic cancer, Monica. Stage 4. They give me a month, maybe 2. Silence. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head. She was calculating. If I died, the restraining order died with me. And more importantly, my assets would be up for grabs. Oh, Thomas, she said, her voice shifting instantly from hostility to a cautious, fake sympathy. I had no idea. That is terrible. It is punishment, I said. Punishment for how I treated you, for how I treated Daniel. Lying there in that MRI machine, I realized you were right. You are the only one who has been there for him. I have been a stubborn, angry old fool. You have been difficult, she agreed, testing the waters. I want to make it right, I continued. Before I go, I have the lake house. I have my investment portfolio. It is worth about $4 million. I was going to leave it to charity, but seeing how you care for him, I want you to have it. All of it. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. $4 million. It wasn't the $50 million she was stealing from Daniel, but greed is an addiction. It is never enough. I want to sign the papers tomorrow night, I said. I am hosting a small dinner. A farewell dinner. Just you, Daniel, and me. I will have the notary there. I just want to see my son one last time before the end. Please, Monica. Bring him. She hesitated. Bringing Daniel out was a risk. He was weak, unpredictable. But the promise of easy money, of a total victory, where she gets everything and I die apologizing to her. It was too sweet to resist. I don't know if he is up for it, she said slowly. He is very weak. I will send a private medical transport I offered. Just for an hour, please. It is my dying wish. Fine, she said. Tomorrow at 7. But if you start any drama, Thomas, we are leaving, and you will never see a dime of that inheritance again. Thank you, I whispered. Thank you, Monica. I hung up. The weakness vanished from my posture instantly. I stood up straight, staring at the phone. She took the bait. She was coming into the lion's den, and she was bringing the victim with her. I spent the next 24 hours turning my house into a trap. I called Gary. We needed cameras. Not the obvious security ones, but micro cameras hidden in the dining room chandelier, in the flower arrangements, behind the books on the shelf. I wanted every angle covered. I wanted her face in 4K resolution when the truth came out. Then I called Detective Reynolds. He was an old colleague from the force, a man who owed me a favor from the precinct days. He was retired now, but he still had pull, and more importantly, he still had his badge and a few friends in active duty who trusted his gut. I sat him down in my kitchen and showed him the toxicology report. I showed him the photos of Monica and Marcus at the motel. I played the audio recording of her phone call. Reynolds listened in silence, his face hardening like stone. "This is solid, Thomas," he said, tapping the table. "But if we bust in there, she clams up. She lawyers up. We need a confession. Or we need an overt act." "She is bringing the poison with her," I said. "I know she is. She wants to finish him off. She will try to administer that booster dose during dinner. She is arrogant, Reynolds. She thinks I am dying. She thinks I am on her side. She will slip up." So the plan was set. Reynolds and 2 plainclothes officers would be stationed in my pantry and the laundry room adjacent to the dining area. They would be listening to everything via the hidden microphones. Gary would be in the basement monitoring the video feeds. I set the table. I used the fine china, the silver that my wife and I had received as a wedding gift. I placed 3 settings. At Daniel's spot, I placed a crystal water goblet. At Monica's, a wine glass. And at mine, nothing. I looked at the clock. 6:30. They would be here soon. I walked to the window and watched the rain falling on the empty street. This was it. The final gamble. If this went wrong, Monica would leave with Daniel and I would never see him alive again. If she sensed a trap, if she saw a wire, if I broke character for even a second, it was over. I went back to the mirror one last time. I messed up my hair. I practiced the cough. I had to become the Ong Jia Sap Chet, the dying old man. I had to let her gloat. I had to let her insult me. I had to let her think she was the smartest person in the room, right up until the moment the handcuffs clicked. Headlights swept across the living room wall. A van pulled into the driveway. It was the private ambulance I had hired. My heart hammered against my ribs, not with fear, but with a cold, predatory anticipation. "Welcome to my house, Monica," I whispered. "I hope you are hungry, because you are about to eat your own lies." The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. The sound echoed through the house like a gavel striking a judge's bench, signaling that court was now in session. I sat at the head of the mahogany dining table, my body slumped in a carefully rehearsed posture of defeat. I had applied a thin layer of gray makeup to my cheeks to accentuate the hollows, and I wore a loose cardigan that made my shoulders look frail. Tonight, I was not the hunter. I was the dying prey, offering myself up to the wolves. I heard the front door open. Gary, dressed in a black waiter's uniform with his head lowered, respectfully ushered them in. Then I saw them. The sight of my son nearly broke my concentration. Daniel was in a wheelchair, pushed by 2 orderlies from the private medical transport service. He looked even worse than he had yesterday. His head lolled to the side, his eyes half open and unseeing. He was wearing a suit that was now 2 sizes too big for him, the fabric bunching around his wasted frame. It was a macabre display. Monica had dressed him up for his own funeral. Monica walked behind the wheelchair looking radiant. She wore a black dress that was tasteful, but cut just low enough to be distracting. She had the glow of a woman who believes she has already won the lottery. She dismissed the orderlies with a wave of her hand, telling them to wait in the van. "Hello, Thomas," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "We made it." It was not easy getting him out of bed, but I told him how important this was to you. "Thank you, Monica," I wheezed, forcing a cough that rattled in my chest. "I appreciate it more than you know. Please sit." She wheeled Daniel to the spot on my right. She sat on my left. The table was set with my finest silver gleaming under the light of the crystal chandelier. but my eyes were fixed on one object. Monica carried a sleek stainless steel water bottle. She did not place it on the side table. She placed it directly in front of Daniel, right next to his wine glass. "He can't drink wine, obviously," she explained, noticing my stare. "I brought his special alkaline water. It is the only thing his stomach can tolerate right now. It has his evening supplements mixed in." Supplements. That was a polite word for the lethal dose of thallium she had prepared to finish the job. She wanted him to drink it here in front of me so that when he died later tonight, or tomorrow morning, the timeline would be confused, and the blame would be diffused. Gary stepped forward to pour the wine for Monica. This was the moment. We had practiced this move a dozen times in the last hour. "Would you care for the Pinot Noir, madam?" Gary asked, his voice low and gravelly. He kept his face turned slightly away, hidden by the shadows of the room. "Yes, pour it," she said, not even looking at him. To her, he was just hired help in visible furniture. Gary leaned in with the bottle. As he poured, he deliberately allowed the napkin draped over his arm to knock a silver fork off the table. It clattered loudly onto the hardwood floor. "Oh, clumsy oaf," Monica snapped, looking down at the floor. In that split second of distraction, Gary's other hand moved with the speed of a magician. He swept the stainless steel bottle off the table and replaced it with an identical one we had bought that afternoon. The swap was seamless. The lethal bottle disappeared into the deep pocket of his apron, and the clean bottle sat in its place. "I am terribly sorry," Madame Gary mumbled, picking up the fork. "Just get away from me," she hissed. I watched the clean bottle. My heart was pounding so hard I thought she would hear it. The weapon was neutralized. Now the torture could begin. "Let us propose a toast," I said, raising my empty glass with a trembling hand. "To family and to forgiveness." Monica raised her wine. "To forgiveness," she smiled. She picked up Daniel's cup, poured some of the water from the clean bottle into it, and held it to his lips. "Drink, baby," she cooed. "Just a sip for Dad." Daniel obediently took a sip. I watched, knowing it was just water, but the image of her feeding him still made my skin crawl. "Now about the papers," she said, setting the cup down. "Daniel is very tired, Thomas. We should get the signing done so I can take him home." "Of course," I said. I reached under the table and pulled out a thick leather folder. "This is the revised will and the transfer of assets. It grants you full control of the lake house, the investment portfolio, and the voting rights for my shares in the family trust." Her eyes lit up. She reached for the pen. But I interrupted, holding up a finger. "My lawyer insisted on a few conditions. Just standard formalities to protect the tax liability. I have to read them to you to ensure you understand." She sighed, drumming her manicured fingernails on the table. "Fine. Read them. But make it fast." I put on my reading glasses, taking my sweet time to wipe the lenses. I opened the document to the first page. Clause 1, I read, my voice slow and deliberate. "The beneficiary, Monica Bennett, agrees to maintain the lake house as a historical landmark subject to quarterly inspections by the County Heritage Board. Failure to pass inspection will result in the property reverting to the state." "Quarterly inspections," she frowned. "That sounds annoying." "It is just paperwork," I waved it off. Clause 2. "The investment portfolio will be transferred into a blind trust. You will receive a monthly stipend of $50,000 provided you submit a notarized affidavit of sobriety and good conduct." What, she snapped, her voice rising. "Sobriety. I don't have a drinking problem. And 50,000. You said the portfolio was worth 4 million. I want access to the principal, not an allowance like a child." "It is for your protection, Monica," I said, looking at her with wide, innocent eyes. "You know how volatile the market is. I just want to make sure you are taken care of for life." She glared at me, her jaw tight. "Just read the rest, Thomas." Clause 3. I continued turning the page with agonizing slowness. "In the event of Daniel's death." The room went silent. She froze. "In the event of Daniel's death within 5 years of this signing, The entire estate will be frozen pending a full autopsy and independent forensic audit to rule out foul play. This is a non-negotiable clause required by the insurance underwriters. I saw the color drain from her face. This was the clause that terrified her. She needed him dead by tomorrow, but if she killed him, she would trigger an audit. But she couldn't object to it without sounding suspicious. Why is that in there?" she stammered. "Do you think someone is going to hurt him?" "It is just standard," I said, shrugging. "Unless you have something to worry about." "No, of course not," she said quickly. "It is just morbid." I looked at Daniel. He was slumped over, his breathing shallow. "He looks thirsty," I said softly. Monica looked at Daniel, then at the water bottle. I could see the panic rising in her eyes. She had a timeline. She had Marcus waiting for the money. She needed Daniel to consume that poison now, so the process would be irreversible before anyone asked questions. She decided to ignore the clause. She probably thought she could bribe the coroner later. "He needs his medicine," she said abruptly. She grabbed the cup again, filling it to the brim with the water. She didn't hold it gently this time. She grabbed Daniel by the back of the neck, forcing his head up. "Drink this, Daniel," she ordered, her voice losing its sweetness. "Drink the whole thing. You need to be hydrated before we go." "I am not thirsty," Daniel mumbled, trying to turn his head away. "I said drink it," she snapped, pressing the cup against his teeth. I sat there, gripping the arms of my chair. I wanted to leap across the table and smash the cup out of her hand. I wanted to strangle her, but I had to wait. I had to let the camera record this. I had to let the police in the pantry hear the desperation in her voice. She tipped the cup. Water spilled down Daniel's chin, soaking his shirt. He coughed, choking, but he swallowed. "Good boy," she whispered, her eyes manic. "That is it. Drink it all." She emptied the cup. Then she poured another. "One more," she said. "Just to be safe." She was trying to overdose him right in front of me. She was drowning him in what she thought was poison. When the second cup was empty, she slammed it down on the table. She looked at me, her chest heaving slightly. "There," she said. "He is hydrated. Now give me the damn pen." I looked at her. I looked at the empty cup. And then I looked at the hidden camera in the chandelier. I closed the folder. "Actually, Monica," I said, my voice dropping the tremble. My voice was suddenly strong, clear, and cold as ice. "I don't think I will be signing anything tonight." She blinked, confused by the sudden change in my tone. "What, you dragged us all the way out here?" "And you," I interrupted, standing up from my chair. I stood to my full height, pushing the wheelchair aside. I was not frail. I was not dying. I was a father fueled by a rage that burned hotter than hellfire. "You dragged my son here to kill him." Her eyes went wide. "Excuse me," I pointed at the water bottle. "You think that is thallium, don't you? You think you just gave him the final dose? You think he is going to go home and die in his sleep so you and Marcus can buy a yacht?" She stood up, knocking her chair over. "Who is Marcus? I don't know what you are talking about. You are senile. We are leaving." She grabbed the handles of Daniel's wheelchair. "Sit down, Monica," I roared. The sound was so loud it shook the glasses on the table. Gary stepped out of the shadows. He wasn't looking down anymore. He was holding the original water bottle, the one she had brought in a sealed evidence bag. We swapped the bottle, Monica. Gary said, his voice calm. "Daniel just drank water. But the contents of this bottle, I tested it in the kitchen. It is enough to kill everyone on this block." She looked at the bag in Gary's hand. Then she looked at me. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The trap had snapped shut. "This is entrapment," she screamed, her face twisting into an ugly mask of fury. "You can't prove I put anything in there. Daniel prepared that water himself. He is suicidal." I smiled. It was a cold, wolfish smile. "I don't have to prove it, Monica. You just did." I looked toward the pantry door. "Detectives, I think you have heard enough." The pantry door burst open. Detective Reynolds and two uniformed officers stepped out, guns drawn. Monica Bennett Reynolds said, his voice filling the room. "Put your hands where I can see them." Monica looked at the cops, then at the back door. For a second, I thought she was going to run. But then her eyes landed on the steak knife on the table. And in that moment, the greed in her eyes was replaced by something much more dangerous. Desperation. The air in the dining room was thick enough to choke on. Detective Reynolds stood by the pantry door, his service weapon leveled at Monica's chest, but she did not seem to see him. She did not see the uniformed officers flanking him, nor did she see Gary standing in the shadows with the evidence bag. Her entire world had narrowed down to one single point of focus. She was staring at Daniel. She was waiting. I could see the calculations running frantically behind her eyes. She had watched him drink 2 full cups of water. If that water had contained the thallium sulfate she prepared, the reaction should have been immediate. His weakened system, already pushed to the brink, should have collapsed. He should be seizing. He should be gasping for air as his diaphragm paralyzed. She was waiting for the show to start so she could play the grieving widow one last time. But Daniel did not seize. In fact, he looked better. The water, clean and cool, had washed away the dry, metallic taste of the poison that had been coating his throat for weeks. He sat up a little straighter in his wheelchair. The color was returning to his cheeks, just a faint flush, but it was there. He blinked, his eyes clearing as the hydration hit his system. He looked at his wife, then at the empty cup, and finally at me. He looked confused, like a man waking up from a long, dark nightmare. "Why isn't he dying, Monica?" I asked, my voice slicing through the silence. She flinched, her head snapping toward me. Her face was pale, her lipstick looking like a wound on her skin. "I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. She looked back at Daniel, her eyes wide with panic. "Daniel. Baby, are you okay? You look pale. Lie down." "I am fine," Daniel whispered. His voice was stronger than it had been in months. "Actually, I feel awake." "No, you are not," she hissed, stepping closer to him. "You are sick. You are dying. Remember what the doctor said." "The doctor you paid," I interrupted. "Or the doctor you lied to." I picked up the remote control from the table. It was heavy in my hand, a black plastic judge's gavel. "You said I was senile, Monica. You said I was paranoid. You told my son that I was the villain in his story. But I think it is time we watched a different story. A home movie." I pressed the power button. The 60-inch flat-screen television mounted above the fireplace roared to life. I had connected it directly to my laptop. The image was grainy black and white, shot from a high angle. It was the master bedroom. Daniel's bedroom. Daniel gasped, his hands gripping the armrests of his wheelchair. That is my room." On the screen, Monica walked into the frame. The timestamp in the corner read 8:43 p.m. 2 nights ago. In the video, Daniel was asleep. Monica stood over him, looking down with a face devoid of love. She looked bored. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the white paper packet. She dumped the powder into the soup on the nightstand. She stirred it. The room was silent save for the sound of Monica's breathing on the video and the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Daniel watched, his mouth falling open. He looked from the screen to the woman standing next to him, the woman who had sworn to protect him in sickness and in health. Then the audio cut to the bathroom scene. I had synced the files. The screen went black, but the sound was crystal clear. It was Monica's voice echoing through the speakers with terrifying clarity. "He is fading fast. Honestly, I don't think he will last the weekend. His kidneys are shutting down. He is pissing blood." Daniel flinched as if he had been slapped. He touched his own stomach, remembering the pain, the blood, the terror he had felt alone in that bathroom. The voice on the recording laughed. It was a cruel, sharp sound. $32 million, baby. We are going to be kings. Just make sure the yacht is ready." I paused the video. The silence that followed was heavier than the one before. It was the silence of a heart breaking. Daniel turned his head slowly. The movement looked painful, stiff with betrayal. He looked at Monica. 32 million, he whispered. His voice was broken, trembling with a sorrow so deep it made my own heart ache. That is how much I was worth to you. Monica shook her head frantically. No. No, Daniel, listen to me. That is fake. He made it up. He used AI. You know technology, Daniel. You run a tech company. You know they can fake voices now. It is a deepfake. She reached out to touch him. Don't touch me, Daniel roared. It was a sound I had never heard from him. It was primal. He swatted her hand away with a strength I didn't know he still possessed. I saw you. He sobbed, tears streaming down his gray face. I saw you mixing it. In the video. You were wearing that cardigan. The one I bought you for our anniversary. He pulled up his sleeve, ripping the fabric in his haste. He pointed to the needle marks on his arm. And the shots. The B12 shots. You said they were for energy. But every time you gave me one, I felt like my veins were on fire. You were killing me. You were looking me in the eye and killing me. Monica took a step back. Her defense was crumbling. The denial wasn't working. The gaslighting had failed. She looked around the room wild-eyed. She saw the detective moving closer. She saw Gary blocking the hallway. She saw me standing at the head of the table looking at her with cold, hard judgment. Her face changed. The mask of the loving wife fell away completely, revealing the predator underneath. Her features twisted into a sneer of pure hatred. She stopped crying. She straightened her back. So what? She spat. Her voice was venomous. So what if I did look at you, Daniel? Look at yourself. You are pathetic. You are weak. You were never going to run that company. You were going to drive it into the ground with your soft heart and your ethics. Marcus and I, we had a vision. We deserved that money. We earned it dealing with your whining for 3 years. She turned to me, her eyes blazing. And you old fossil, you should have just died. You should have stayed away and died. She was cornered. She was exposed. And like any trapped animal, she decided to attack. Mrs. Bennett, put your hands behind your back, Detective Reynolds barked, stepping forward with his handcuffs out. No, she screamed. I am not going to prison. I am not losing everything to this family of losers. Her hand shot out. She didn't go for the door. She knew she couldn't outrun the police. She went for the table. She grabbed the steak knife from beside her plate. It was a heavy, serrated blade sharp enough to cut through a ribeye. Monica, drop it. Reynolds shouted, raising his weapon. She didn't drop it. She didn't look at the police, she looked at me. I was the architect of her downfall. I was the one who had tricked her, humiliated her, and stripped her of her prize. If I am going down, she shrieked, her voice cracking with madness, I am taking you with me. She kicked the wheelchair aside, sending Daniel spinning, and lunged across the table. She moved with a terrifying speed. She wasn't an athlete, but rage gave her wings. She vaulted over the crystal glasses and the silver platters, the knife raised high above her head, aimed directly at my throat. I stood my ground. I didn't flinch. I didn't run. I had spent my life looking at death. I wasn't afraid of it, but I also wasn't going to let her win. As the blade came down gleaming in the chandelier light, time seemed to slow. I saw the madness in her eyes. I saw the reflection of my own face in the steel. And I saw the end of the road for the woman who had tried to destroy my bloodline. I braced myself for the impact, but I wasn't just an old man anymore. I was a father defending his cub, and I had one last trick up my sleeve. The blade did not hit my throat. I had braced myself for the bite of cold steel, for the spray of arterial blood that I had seen so many times on my autopsy table. I was ready to take that hit if it meant keeping the monster away from my son. But the impact never came. Instead, there was a deafening crash of metal against metal and the sickening sound of a body hitting the floor hard. Daniel. My son, who moments ago could barely lift a cup of water, who had been confined to a wheelchair by months of systematic poisoning, had found a reserve of strength that defied medical science. It was the adrenaline of betrayal. It was the primal instinct of a man realizing that the person he slept beside was a predator. He had thrown himself out of the wheelchair, launching his emaciated body between the knife and me. He caught Monica mid-air, his shoulder slamming into her chest with a force born of pure desperation. They tumbled onto the hardwood floor in a tangle of limbs and expensive fabric. The steak knife slashed down, missing its intended target, but finding flesh nonetheless. A bright crimson line opened up on Daniel's forearm, blood immediately soaking into the white sleeve of his dress shirt. Daniel the First screamed, lunging forward. Monica scrambled to her knees, her hair wild, her eyes bulging with the madness of a cornered animal. She raised the knife again, ready to strike down the husband she had already half killed. She did not look human anymore. The beautiful, composed yoga instructor was gone. In her place was a creature of pure avarice, snarling and spitting. "Get off me, you useless cripple," she shrieked, kicking Daniel in the ribs. Before she could bring the knife down a second time, a heavy boot slammed into her shoulder. Detective Reynolds did not hesitate. He hit her with the force of a freight train, driving her face first into the Persian rug. The knife skittered across the floor, spinning until it hit the baseboard with a harmless ting. Police Reynolds roared, pressing his knee into the small of her back. "Stop resisting, or you will be tased." Get off me," Monica screamed, thrashing like a wildcat. She tried to bite the detective's hand. She tried to claw at his eyes. It took 2 uniformed officers rushing in from the pantry to finally pin her limbs down. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the sweetest music I had ever heard. Click, click, click. I fell to my knees beside Daniel. He was gasping for air, clutching his bleeding arm, but his eyes were wide open. He was staring at the woman being dragged to her feet by the police. Monica continued to scream, but she wasn't screaming for a lawyer. She was screaming her truth, vomiting up the darkness she had kept hidden behind green juices and meditation apps for 2 years. "You ruined it," she spat at me. Her face pressed against the floorboards as the officers hauled her up. "You meddling old fossil. We were so close. He was supposed to be dead by Monday. Do you know how much I sacrificed? Do you know how hard it is to pretend to love that pathetic, weak man?" She looked at Daniel with a sneer that would haunt my nightmares. "I hated touching you," she hissed. "Every time you kissed me, I wanted to vomit. You are nothing but a bank account with a pulse. I deserved that money. I earned every penny for putting up with your whining and your sickness." "Shut her up," I growled, my hands shaking as I pressed a napkin to Daniel's wound. "Get her out of my house before I kill her myself." Reynolds yanked her toward the door. "Oh, we are taking her, Mr. Bennett, and do not worry about her retirement plan." He leaned close to Monica's ear, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "We just got a call from airport security at SeaTac. Your partner, Marcus Thorne. He tried to board a flight to the Cayman Islands 10 minutes ago. We flagged his passport. He is in custody, Monica. And the first thing he did, when we slapped the cuffs on him, he offered to testify against you for a reduced sentence. He gave you up." Monica froze. The fight drained out of her instantly. The arrogance, the rage, the entitlement. It all evaporated, leaving behind only the hollow shell of a defeated narcissist. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She realized she was truly alone. No money, no lover, no exit. "Take her away," Reynolds ordered. As they dragged her out the front door, she didn't look back. She didn't look at the luxury house she had coveted, or the husband she had tortured. She just stared at the ground, her feet dragging a broken queen of a kingdom built on lies. The heavy oak door slammed shut, cutting off her wailing, leaving a ringing silence in the dining room. I turned my attention back to the only thing that mattered. "Daniel," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Let me see the arm." Daniel didn't answer. He was trembling violently, the adrenaline crash hitting him all at once. The pain, the shock, and the physical toll of the poison were overwhelming his system. His face was ashen sweat beading on his forehead. He looked at the blood on his arm, then he looked up at me. His eyes were filled with tears, but for the first time in months, they were clear. The fog of manipulation was gone. Dad. He whispered, his voice cracking. I am here, son, I said, ripping off my tie to make a tourniquet. I am right here. You are safe. The monsters are gone. He reached out with his good hand and gripped my cardigan. He held on tight like he used to when he was a little boy, afraid of the thunder. I told you to get out, he sobbed, his chest heaving. I called you crazy. I let her ban you from the hospital. I almost signed the papers, Dad. I almost gave her everything. Shh, don't talk. I soothed him, tightening the cloth around his arm. It wasn't you, Daniel. It was the poison. It was the lies. She is a professional manipulator. She fooled everyone. She fooled the doctors. She almost fooled me. No, Daniel shook his head, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the sweat. You never gave up. You drove through the gate. You broke into the house. You saved me when I didn't want to be saved. His grip on my shirt tightened, his knuckles turning white. I am so sorry, Dad. I am so sorry. I should have trusted you. I should have known. I pulled him into my arms, hugging his frail, shaking body against my chest. I felt his ribs through the suit, sharp and fragile. I buried my face in his neck, smelling the sweat and the faint chemical odor that still lingered on his skin, but beneath that, I smelled my son. He was alive. He was damaged. He was hurt. But he was alive. There is nothing to forgive, I whispered into his hair, letting my own tears finally fall. You are my son. I would burn the whole world down to get you back. And I got you back. That is all that matters. Daniel buried his face in my shoulder and wept. He cried for the marriage that was a lie. He cried for the betrayal of his best friend. He cried for the physical agony he had endured, and I just held him, rocking him back and forth on the floor of my dining room, surrounded by cold food and broken glass. Gary stepped forward from the shadows, his face grim but relieved. He knelt down beside us, his medical bag in hand. Thomas, he said softly, the ambulance is outside. We need to get him to the hospital. Real doctors this time. We need to start the chelation therapy immediately if we want to save his kidneys. I nodded, wiping my face. I pulled back and looked at Daniel. You hear that, son? I asked, smoothing his hair back. We have to go, but this time I am coming with you. I am not leaving your side, not for a second. Daniel nodded weakly. He tried to sit up, but he had no strength left. Dad, he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Yeah. Don't let go, he said. I won't, I promised. I grabbed his hand, his blood staining my palm, a bond of iron and red that could never be broken again. I signaled to the paramedics who were waiting in the hallway. They rushed in with the stretcher. As we lifted Daniel up, I looked around the room one last time. The camera in the chandelier was still blinking red. The table was a mess. The steak knife lay on the floor like a discarded fang. It was a crime scene. But to me, it looked like a victory. I walked alongside the stretcher as we wheeled him out into the night. The rain had stopped. The air was cool and clean. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the oxygen of freedom. The nightmare was over. The healing was about to begin. And as the ambulance doors closed, shutting us in together, I knew that the hardest work was still ahead of us. But we were Bennett's. We had survived the poison. We would survive the cure. The sound of a judge's gavel is a strange thing. It is just a piece of wood hitting another piece of wood, but when it echoed through the King County Superior Court 6 months later, it sounded like the heaviest door in the world slamming shut. I sat in the front row watching the back of Monica's head. She was not wearing her designer yoga clothes or her expensive jewelry. She was wearing a shapeless orange jumpsuit that washed out her complexion, leaving her looking small, pale, and incredibly ordinary. The judge did not mince words. He called her actions calculated, cruel, and devoid of human empathy. He sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole for attempted murder, fraud, and elder abuse. Marcus Thorne, her partner in crime, got 20 years thanks to his plea deal, But looking at him shivering on the defense bench, I knew he would not last 5 years in general population. When the bailiffs moved in to take her away, Monica turned around. For a second, I thought she would scream or curse us one last time, but she just looked at Daniel. Her eyes were empty. There was no rage left, just a vast, hollow confusion, as if she still could not understand how her perfect plan had crumbled. Daniel did not look away. He held her gaze steady and calm until she was dragged through the side door and out of our lives forever. We walked out of the courthouse into the bright Seattle sunshine. Reporters were swarming the steps, microphones thrust forward like spears, asking for a comment on the poison wife case that had dominated the headlines. I put my arm around Daniel's shoulder and guided him to the waiting car. We had no comment. The truth had already been spoken loud and clear. The road to this moment had been paved with agony. The night of the arrest was not the end. It was just the beginning of a different kind of battle. The doctors told us that the level of thallium in Daniel's system should have killed him. The chelation therapy required to strip the heavy metals from his blood was brutal. For 3 months, I practically lived in his hospital room. I slept in the uncomfortable vinyl chair, waking up at every beep of the monitor. I watched my son writhe in pain as the toxins were leached from his bones. I held the bucket while he vomited until there was nothing left. I wiped the sweat from his forehead when the fevers spiked so high they threatened to cook his brain. There were nights when he begged me to let him go, nights when the pain in his nerve endings was so intense he could not bear the weight of a bedsheet. But I did not let him go. I sat by his bed, and I told him stories. I told him about the fishing trips we used to take when he was a boy. I told him about his mother. I told him about the future that was waiting for him. And slowly, day by agonizing day, the gray color left his skin. His kidneys began to function again. The hair that had fallen out began to grow back thick and dark. When he was finally discharged, the first thing Daniel did was go back to Bennett Biotech. He did not go back as a victim. He went back as a storm. He walked into the boardroom with a cane still weak, but with a fire in his eyes that I had not seen in years. He fired the entire executive board that had been complicit with Marcus. He fired the HR director who had ignored the red flags. He purged the company of every single person who had prioritized profit over loyalty. He rebuilt his empire from the ground up this time, with a foundation of absolute transparency. Now we are far away from boardrooms and courtrooms. The air here smells of pine needles and damp earth, not antiseptic and fear. We are sitting on the edge of the dock at my lake house, our legs dangling over the water. The early morning mist is just starting to lift off the surface of the lake, revealing the glassy reflection of the mountains. I look at Daniel. He is baiting his hook with steady hands. He has gained 20 pounds since the trial. He looks healthy. He looks like himself again. He casts his line into the water, the reel singing a soft, high-pitched song that breaks the silence. "You know, Dad," he says, keeping his eyes on the bobber. "I used to hate coming here. I thought it was too quiet. And now I ask." Now he smiles, a genuine expression that reaches his eyes. "Now I think quiet is the most expensive luxury in the world." We sit there for a long time, not saying anything. We do not need to. The silence between us is comfortable, filled with the unspoken understanding of two soldiers who have survived the same war. We caught the monster. We survived the poison. And we are still here. I look at the water, thinking about the lunchbox that started it all. It feels like a lifetime ago. I think about the woman who tried to turn my son into a corpse and me into a ghost. She underestimated us. She thought she could break the bond between a father and son with chemicals and lies. She did not know that some bonds are forged in fire, and they only get stronger when you try to burn them. People say children are a gift from God. But sometimes to protect that gift, a father has to become a devil to those who dare to touch his family. That lunchbox did not just contain poison. It contained the hardest lesson I ever had to learn about the darkness of the human heart. But looking at my son, now breathing the fresh air, alive and free, I know it was a lesson worth learning. Because in the end, love is not just about being gentle. Love is about being the wall that stands between your family and the abyss. The most terrifying betrayals often come from the people we share our beds and our secrets with. We are taught to trust blindly in marriage, to believe that love conquers all, but this story is a harsh reminder that trust must be earned and verified even with those closest to us. If your intuition tells you something is wrong, if you see changes in a loved one's health, personality, or behavior, do not let anyone, even a spouse, gaslight you into silence. A parent's instinct is a primal alarm system. Ignoring it can be fatal. Vigilance is the highest form of love. If this story made you want to hug your loved ones a little tighter today, please hit that like button and share this video. Have you ever had a gut feeling about someone that turned out to be right? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you want to support the channel so I can keep bringing you these true stories of survival and justice, consider hitting the super thanks button. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. I will see you in the next story. Stay safe and trust your gut.